Hello, or should I say ocean's blessings, because today we are finally going to be diving into the wonderful world of Empires SMP.
She's finally doing an Empires video! Woo!
This is the series where I take my obsession with diorama crafting YouTubers and then combine it with my obsession of Minecraft YouTubers into this weird midpoint that is my channel. On my last video, I got a ton of suggestions of what build I should bring to the real world next, and the one I decided to go with was LDShadowLady's Prismarine Palace from the Ocean Empire. I absolutely adore Lizzie's empire with its bright colors, unique build style, and it even has its own musical. This empire's got it all. Alright, so there's like two main reasons why I'm choosing this build, compared to a bunch of other empires which tend to be made of a bunch of smaller builds that make one mega build at the end. The Prismarine Palace, on the other hand, is one very central and iconic build that is within reason for me to make. And by that I mean a lot of people were like, why don't you just make the entirety of the Goblin Empire? Why don't you just build Stratos? Hey, come here. Ain't no way am I putting myself through that. Now for the second reason is because I want to try and challenge myself to do something new. Something that I've always wanted to try is to create a realistic looking water texture with epoxy resin. Whenever I see anyone else do it, it just looks magical and I feel like I can do it. Plus you can't have the Ocean Empire without the ocean now, can you? Now in order to do this, what I'm envisioning is to make it look like I just pulled a Minecraft chunk right from the Ocean Empire. At first I thought I was going to have to build this acrylic tray base thing, that way I could make the ocean water base. But lucky for me, they just sell it on Amazon. Don't you just hate the fact that Amazon is kind of just taking over everything, but it's so convenient that you can't fight against it? Anyway, I bought that. That problem's out of the way. So now I knew whatever I made needed to fit in this 12 by 12 square. And I found from last time that it's very easy for the scale that you were going for at the beginning just to end up wildly different by the end. See, this isn't my first rodeo. It's my second. I feel like things can notoriously still go pretty wrong at a second rodeo. I mean, it's only your second time. Who knows what will happen? So to try and prevent this from happening, I decided to brush off my 3D modeling skills and try and create the diorama in Blender first. Some of you might be wondering, why the heck do you know how to 3D model? You see, back in high school, I was convinced I was going to go into animation. So I would spend my free time after school watching hours of YouTube tutorials and trying to teach myself Blender. You know, like a normal teenager. Obviously, I'm not an animator now, but every now and again I do find uses to brush off my knowledge and make something in Blender. And it ended up being really helpful for this because I was able to visualize the scale and how everything would fit together. Also, it helps me break down the build into its most simplest shapes, making it a little less daunting to get started on. You might also be asking, didn't the palace have 4 towers? Shh. I just left it out because I didn't think I could fit it in. It wasn't even there for a majority of the season anyway, so it's fine. Once I had everything finished in Blender, I was able to take those measurements and start building the diorama. And for the first time in like 6 years, I finally used high school algebra in real life. Alright, Lizzie, what should we start building first?
Name the tower.
Well, I don't have any quartz, but I do have the cardboard box that the tray came in. I'm going to try and use as many recycled materials as I can in this project. This is pretty much inspired by Stetson Studios. One, it's just less money I have to spend on materials, and also I like the challenge of having to look at trash and seeing how it could be used creatively, you know? So taking this cardboard, I start carefully bending it in on itself until eventually it's bending enough for me to make into my first tower.
Perfect circle.
Alright, not so perfect yet, but we're going to continue cutting out the other 2 towers and turning those into cylinders as well. Would you look at that? Can't you just see that majestic ocean palace now? To make them a bit more sturdy, I add in a circular base on the inside and then hot glue the seams. Don't worry, it won't look like cardboard for too much longer because now our next steps are going to be loading it up with a ton of foam around the base. At the top, it will be getting 2mm strips of EVA foam. This will hopefully help visually separate the top of the tower from the base of the tower. Gosh, I've already said tower so many times. Maybe I should have a tower counter as well, but that would take too much editing, so probably not. Then taking a little bit of thinner cardboard, I can seal off the top of the tower, making the top floor, and also a tiny little bongo. After making 2 more towers, it's looking better, but still like cardboard. To fix that, we're going to take a little bit of children's craft foam. Since the foam is so thin, it can easily wrap around the tower and then cover up and smooth out the texture. Alright, so this part that I'm doing right now is something completely useless. I was trying to texture the foam to like look more like stone, and it kind of did work, just rolling tinfoil over it, made all these little dents, but I ended up texturing using something different later, so it doesn't come through. Though I would recommend if you had any pent-up rage that you need to get out. Not that I have any. Anyways, it's time to glue on the foam. And I started out all carefully at first, making sure everything was aligned, there wasn't too much glue. Then I realized that I have to do 3 of these, so it's time to just pour it on. And this looks better covering up a lot of the bends of the cardboard. Now for the other 2. Though this method does leave us with this unsightly seam, but the good thing is we can do this totally necessary step of covering it with foam clay, because it's necessary. At least that's what my supervisor told me. Right, Supervisor Mumbo? Alright, now it's just time for a ton more of foam strips. Okay, so the reason that I'm adding so many foam strips is because a lot of the references I was looking at for this build, a lot of them would have lines that would lead your eyes up the tower, and it also helped give more layers to it, and I thought this would be a good idea to help add that depth, taking it from just a cylinder to what can now be a palace tower. Alright, just gotta place on the last column here, and it's I didn't have to cover that seam earlier, did I? So far I've been using white glue, and that's been taking way too long, so let's speed it up a little bit. Alright, the base is done, and let's move on to the top of the tower. Again, so I don't have any Prismarine on me, so my first attempt to make the columns were originally out of construction paper, which overall were really time consuming and looked,
Pretty bad.
They did make alright bowling pins though. It was at that moment I remembered I had even more hot glue I could use. Because what problem can't hot glue fix? Basically, I've had this bag of hot glue sticks forever and they're like 5XL. I don't have a hot glue gun that can even use it, but they are the exact shape I need for these cylinders. Why did I dump all these out? Now I have to pick them back up. Okay, perhaps using hot glue as a building material isn't the most efficient, but I haven't had any other use for these, so I'm going to use it. It's also really funny that I'm using hot glue to hot glue something to hot glue. And just by adding a few foam strips, make these columns look pretty good to me. Alright, now moving on to the arches. For this, I'm actually going to be starting out in Adobe Illustrator to make myself a template. Because this is a circle that needs to have even arches going all the way around, I didn't have the patience for the math to figure that out. After cutting out my template, it was time to move on to the big boy foam. This is an 8mm foam, which I chose just because I wanted this to have some thickness to it. The only problem is it's just really hard to cut these arches when foam is this thick, making the edges look really choppy. Now we can't have that for our Ocean Queen's palace, now can we? To fix that up, I just took a little bit of foam clay and spread it over the rough edges to smooth it out. Oh yes, this is much better. I don't know what accent I'm doing, but I'm just sticking with it at this point. And of course, we have to add even more foam strips, because I've decided at this point that everything just looks fancier when you add more strips to it. Then with a trim off the top and a bit of super glue, we have our arches. If you're looking at it and thinking it looks a little bit wonky, that's because it is, and I'm going to regret this later. But let's continue on blissfully unaware, shall we? After finishing the other 2 arches, you know what it's time for?
To build a dome.
So my first method of trying to do this, since spheres are kind of hard, is to try and make a pattern from a sphere I already have, because it was the size that I needed, but I just needed multiple of them. There's a process I see a lot, especially in cosplay videos, where you make a pattern by covering the shape that you want in cling wrap and duct tape, and then tracing along the edge and cutting that out. Then theoretically, I should have been able to retrace those shapes on the foam, and then the end product should be a sphere. That did not happen. I got so frustrated with this, I decided to give up and go get dinner instead. This is relevant, I swear. Because you see, I decided to go to Wawa for dinner, which is a gas station but is also one of Orlando's many fine dining establishments. And you know this because they say delicious vibes only. But lo and behold, while I was inside waiting for my delicious panini, you'll never guess what I found. Perfect dome lids of multiple sizes, things I just spent hours trying to recreate. I got the perfect piece of trash and the sandwich. This suddenly turned into a Wawa sponsorship. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. Now that we have our domes, the only thing I have to do is hot glue them on. And then the smaller one only needed a slight trim around the side. They're looking pretty good, but the only thing it's missing are the Prismarine stripes up the dome. Now that we have those, just have to glue it on and try and align it where the columns will be. Kinda just eyeballed the measurements for these strips, so don't look at them too closely. And finally, we can get to assembling together our towers. It's as I'm gluing on these pillars that I start to realize my mistake. I must have mismeasured the circumference of the tower when I was originally making the templates for the arches. That, or it got warped from gluing on all the strips and everything to it, because now it was way bigger than what the actual towers were. As much as I tried to fix it with hot glue and brute force, it didn't quite hold. It wasn't just this tower, it was happening to all of them. And don't get me wrong, I'm normally okay with a little bit of wonk on my projects, but this was an unprecedented amount of wonkiness on here. At this part, I already felt too far in, so I kind of had to just keep going. Alright, so now for the little tiny domes on top, which for these ones, I decided the simplest way to do it would just to be taking a bottle cap and then taking a bit of foam clay and molding it on top. Same thing with the large one, except this one is going to have little arches underneath it. So after molding it, I then take a few little coffee stirrers to create the leg structure, and then I'm going to take apparently my favorite material of this project of foam clay and build out the little legs. At this point, I did decide to do a little bit of surgery on the domes to help with that weird warping. In true Minecraft fashion, I'm going to try and cover my mistakes in texture and then put it towards the back of the build. This bringing us to the main part of the towers complete, but we still got a few more things to do. Moving on to the... Alright, my plan is to just basically brute force this on. I'm so sick and tired of math with all these cylinders and spirals. I'm just going to mark where I want it to end and where I want it to start, and then just take some tape so I can figure out what the line is. Then it was just carefully bending the foam into place. I had to make sure to move slowly because the foam itself kept on wanting to twist when I was bending it. Add a little platform at the bottom and the top. I'm not gonna lie to you, I did consider leaving this as a slide just for the fact that I didn't want to make all the stairs. It's just one of those tasks that's going to take hours to do, and it's probably only going to be in the final shot for like 1.5 seconds, so we're just going to spend a little bit of time on this. We're just going to appreciate all those little stairs. Yeah, this is definitely the point in the project where I'm just looking at it thinking, is this worth all this effort? It's okay, just trust the process. Wait, I don't have a process. Anyway, once the stairs are done, the last thing that we need to make... rocks. Let me introduce the foam cube, which I'll be carving off little bits to make our rocks. Admittedly, foam cube was a little bit more dense than I thought. I may have been struggling, but I refused to lose to a block of foam. Oh great, now foam cube has a knife. Eventually I have enough pieces that look a little bit more like ice cubes rather than rocks right now. Since I was mostly just chopping at random and more focused on getting organic looking shapes, now it was time to basically puzzle them all together to try and fit them around the diorama. The good news is that the hot glue kind of melted the foam together, so it really looked more natural. The bad part is it ate up so much of my hot glue. Now just a few more chops to make it a little bit more rigid, and now we have our rock base. A few more of these glue sticks to make supports for the stairs that will be leading into the bottom rocks. A few more bits of foam to make sure that they blend in. One last check to make sure it can still actually fit in the tray. And the very last thing is to quickly make up some very simple bridges. Now finally, after several days and 35 hot glue sticks, those cardboard tubes that we had at the beginning now has the structure of the Ocean Palace. Though still a palace made out of foam and cardboard, so let's fix that. Now for painting, it's going to be pretty straightforward. There's only like 3 colors on this project. And y'all really liked when I did this last time, so let's go ahead and jump in to super fast paint mode. right, we've got all the colors, but we can't forget the reason that these pink domes are so unique. It's the fact that Lizzie specifically used live coral from the ocean to get the color. So let's make some coral, and a sponge is all we need. I got this from Stetson Studios, where he was originally using it to make flocking for a tree. However, chopping up and trying to make a sponge smoothie leaves you with something that looks a lot like coral. And those with a very observant eye may have noticed that this is the wrong color. To fix that, we're going to get a little patriotic by combining red, white, and glue to try and achieve that hot pink coral texture that we want. And while it was a good shot, after I left it out to dry, it was a way darker, almost purple pink. So in order to fix this, I did what I probably should have done from the beginning, and that's just, oh shoot, run to Walmart and get pink sponges. There we go, much better. Now I just need to add a little bit of pink eraser pink, a bit more glue, a little mix together, and now we have our hot pink coral. Yeah, I'm not going to bother letting it dry this time. I'm just going to accept the fact that I'm getting paint all over my fingers. And once it dried, you could hardly believe this coral texture was nothing more than a chopped up sponge on Wawa trash. And more importantly, I was able to use it to hide my mistakes. And to make sure that my first attempt at the coral isn't a total waste, I'll be combining
moss and coral
to add a little bit of life and color to the base rocks. Would coral actually be able to grow in all these places? Probably not, but also the roof is literally made out of it, so I don't think it matters. Also, it just looks pretty, so that's good enough for me. Finally, with all the details complete, I can attach these towers together, completing the palace. But I do feel like I'm forgetting something.
my ocean.
I'm kidding, of course I didn't forget about the ocean. This is the thing I've been most excited about this whole time. I'll have you know I'm only slightly terrified of messing it up. Alright, so the way that epoxy resin works is that you get a part A and a part B. And it's when you combine an equal amount of both of these together that you start to get a chemical reaction. And it takes a few hours, but that reaction causes it to harden. In order to get that clear tropical blue ocean water, I'm going to be using a small amount of blue and light green dye to get that Caribbean color. I was really timid putting this in because I didn't want to go too opaque, but I didn't want it to not come through. Like, look how pretty this blue is. What if it doesn't look that pretty when I actually use it? Why am I actually nervous to do this? I don't know if I'm going to spray out even. I don't know if I mix enough. Is it warm? Is resin supposed to get warm? It's gotten to this point and I'm just scared of ruining everything. Let's just go for it. Okay, so this is actually surprisingly easy. It's amazing how much I can hype up pouring liquid in my head. I was even so bold as to swirl in a little bit of a more opaque resin. Now, this is actually only the first layer, so I went ahead and let it cure for 24 hours until it was rock solid. The goal for this pour is to have a clearer, opaque layer on top, the idea being that the layers get darker as you go down, making it look like more depth. Going to be honest, I personally didn't see that much of a difference. Don't know if I did it wrong. I personally cared more about the color, and I think that it turned out fantastic. Now, after another night of curing, we have our very smooth looking ocean. Satisfying for sure, but we're missing all that movement and energy that you get from the waves of the ocean. So in order to replicate that, all we need is a little bit of Mod Podge. And what you're going to do is just kind of goop it on there, which feels extremely wrong, but I had to keep on reminding myself that it's going to dry clear and it's going to look like little rough waves on the surface. And then after waiting overnight, we end up with this. Dude, doesn't it just look so good? It actually looks like water with the light glistening off of it. It's so cool. The last step is going to be adding a little bit of whitewater foam where it hits against the rocks and the crests of waves. And with that last detail, the diorama is finally done, and now it's time for the final reveal. I had so much fun making this project, so please let me know in the comments what other builds you would like to see, because I want to make more of these. If you're new here and enjoyed this video, make sure to check out some of my previous videos as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.